Hello and welcome back to the next video in the series of Terraform in Azure. So in the past few videos we've done a bit about Terraform, a bit about variables, a bit about the state file, and we've actually managed to build a resource group and all our networking. So we've built our virtual network, our subnets, our NSGs. So we're ready now to start building the virtual machines. But before we do move on, please hit that subscribe button, and if you like the video, hit that like button. It really helps me if you do. So let's crack on. Let's move over to our client machine and get these virtual machines built. Okay, back at the client machine. So first of all, let's start with what we need to actually build. So let's head over to Terraform IO and find out how we build a virtual machine. So registry, browse providers, Azure, documentation, and let's search for virtual machine. So there's a load here. The one we want to build obviously is going to be Windows virtual machine. So let's have a look at that one. Scroll straight to the example. We don't need to read the bits at the beginning. We've done that on the previous videos. So it's this block here that actually creates the virtual machine. So what's it doing? So it's going to create a virtual machine. It needs a name, like most resources in Azure, a location for the resource group, a location. Obviously, because it's a virtual machine, we need to provide it a size, a SKU size, and we need to tell it what username and password to give to the virtual machine, and it needs a network interface to attach to. So this already assumes a network interface has been created. So we'll look at that in a second. Obviously, it needs an OS disk to actually put the operating system onto, what type of storage it uses, and a image reference. So in this case, it's Windows Server 2016 data center. So what's this all about then? So it already assumes the network interfaces are created. So further up here, there must be creating some network interfaces. Yep, here we go. So let's create these first. So let's grab this block and let's create these network interfaces first. So let's get rid of that example. Let's call them NICs. So it needs a name. Obviously, we're going to need three because we have three servers. We've got a web server, a database server, and a management server. So let's start off by creating a variable for that. Let's create a variable for our servers. Let's call it servers. Makes sense. And we're going to use this type of map again. You guys know I love the map type. It allows us to create an object or a number of objects that we can iterate through. So if you want a bit more of an explanation on that, go back and watch the previous videos. So let's give it a default value. And the first one, we're going to create our management server. So let's give the key a name of man01, which is a good name for our server. We'll do a web01 for our name of our web server. What do I put? 2? I don't know. And it's not minus, it's equals. I need to get a new keyboard. It's not my typing, surely. And we want one for database. So let's call that SQL01. Like so. So as we iterate through this list, that's going to be the server names. So let's go back to our main.tf and use our for each loop again. Again, if this is the first video you've seen in the series, I do recommend you go back and look at the others. So these make much more sense to you. So for each server, so in each of these variables of this object, we're going to loop through, and these are the names of the servers that we're going to give. So we can use this same thing to create our NICs, because our NICs are going to be the same names as well. I like to keep things uniform. So for each, so the name of the NIC, I'm happy with the dash NIC on the end. I like that. So let's change the value of the name. Let's just simply give it the each.key. So again, that will be iterate through this list. The first one's going to be called man01-nic. The second one will be web01-nic and SQL01-nic. Okay, so the location for these objects, we know that they want to be in our RG main resource group. And we want to use the same location as that. Just a reminder, let's quickly scroll up to the top. So the first object we created was this resource group. And that's where we want all our objects to be created. So let's go back and change that. And we also want it to be in that actual resource group of that name. So there we go, we're sorted there. So IP configuration now. I'm happy with the IP configuration name to be called internal, because after all, they're internal NICs. and I'm happy for them to be private IP as dynamic. So rather than having a static IP, I'm happy for them to change each time. Not bothered in this particular solution design that it needs to be static. So dynamic's fine. Now the subnet ID. So what do we put in here? Well, we created subnets earlier in the previous video. So let's find out where they are. So here, nope, here. So we created a variable for subnets, and we've already created the subnet. So let's have a look at what we called those subnets. So it was in the subnets variable. So we gave them the name web, database, and management. So what we can do here on our server object, let's create some more key value pairs. Let's call it subnet. So the first one, we want it to go on to management, which is the same key name as what we've got up in our subnets, if I can find them. There we go. So the key names are these. So as long as we match the same, we can then use them within our code. So the web one was to the web subnet, and the SQL one was to the database subnet. Database subnet. Okay, so we've now got another key value pair for each of these objects. So let's head back over to our main, and we can now, what do we actually call these subnets? So when we create the subnets, it was an alias called subs, or an identity reference as subs. So what we can do here is we can call that reference, but you know this already, and we can call the ID of what we put into our object now. So we can do each dot value, and then, oh, excuse me, and then we can specify what do we have it in our variable as? Subnet. So let's go and grab that. So what it's going to do is going to attach the nick as it creates it to the relevant subnet that we defined within our variable block. So the reason I like doing these map things, because in the future, if we just want to add another machine, just add another one and tell it what subnet to go on, give it a new name, and it will create the nick, and we can use this later to create the VM. So I think that's probably enough. I think we've got that right. So let's do a Terraform plan and see what we get. Okay, so that finished with no errors. So let's just make this a little bit bigger so we can see a bit more. Yes, it's going to add 3. So it's going to be our 3 virtual networks, and fingers crossed it's going to attach it to the subnets that we want. So let's just go ahead and apply that, and then we can have a look in the portal and see what it's built for us. Okay, that also completed with no errors. 3 resources added. So let's head over and take a look. So let's go to our portal. And there's our resource group. And sure enough, got 2 nicks. Where's the third? Let's do a refresh. There we go. Man01 nick, SQL01 nick, and Web02 nick. Web01 nick. So if we look at the first one, it should be attached to our, if we have a look at the IP configurations, so we've got the name of internal we gave it, and it's attached to our management, and it's got a dynamic address just as we wanted. Let's have a look at the SQL one. IP configuration, it's connected to our database subnet. So, and I'm betting the web one's attached to our web subnet, which it is. So that's all good. So next, let's create the virtual machines themselves. So let's head back over to Terraform IO. Here's the virtual machines creation. So let's grab that block and put that into our code. Okay, so again, we're going to use a for each loop. Let's actually change that to servers for our alias. We're going to use the for each again, and we're going to list through that same variable of servers, and we're going to add some more parameters, key value pairs to it for the additional information we need. So we know what the name of the server is. So just a reminder, in the variables, we've got these key names, and that's what the names of our servers are going to be. So our machine name is simply going to be each.key. Resource group name, you know the story now. It's going to be in our RG main, and the location is also going to be in our RG main dot location. Okay, now obviously we've got a size, username, and various other bits, but we don't really want to hard code that there, because each VM we want to be able to set different sizes and different credentials potentially, and the same for the Disco OS and the images sizes. Obviously, here we're just talking about SQL server, sorry, Windows Server 2016, but we also got one that we're going to want to do with an SQL image. So let's take these out and replace them in our variables instead. So let's, again, I'll tidy that up in a second. Let's also grab the caching, storage, because we're going to want to be able to set those independently, and also these as well. So let's just paste them in there for the minute, and let's tidy it up with our Terraform format command. Okay, right, so I'm not really too keen on the size of the F2. That's a bit too expensive for what we're doing. So let's simply change that to standard, what's a good one? D3, I think it's a nice cheap one, V2. Now, if you're wondering where I'm getting this value from, you can get that from the Azure portal in the documentation, or you can use the Azure CLI to grab a list of the SKU sizes. But I know that's a valid one, at least I think it is. So I'm happy with that for the moment. Admin username, happy with that. Password, we're okay with that for the moment. But obviously, we don't really want to have the password or the username in that case in clear text in our code. So we will, in a later video, move that up to a key vault so it's nice and secure. But for the moment, let's leave it there. I'm happy with the caching for the disks, the storage account type, LRS, publisher, Windows Server. So in this case, happy with all that. In fact, though, I'm going to change that to 2019 data center. Again, that's available in the documentation. There's hundreds of different image versions you can use, but I happen to know that 2019 data center is a valid one. So we're good there. So let's grab these and put them. So our web server's got the same, and our SQL server's got the same values. Let's tidy that up again. Terraform format. Okay. Now, the SQL server is going to be slightly different because obviously we don't want it to be a Windows Standard 2019 server. We're going to want it to actually be use an image from the SQL library. The reason we're doing that is because we want to have it pre-installed with SQL. We don't really want to have to install it after as part of a guest configuration. So if I can remember correctly, the publisher should be Microsoft SQL server. I think it's the publisher type. And the offer is, what was it? Windows Server. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's go through and fix our code first, because I'm going to have to look that up again. I can't remember what they are. Okay, so now that we've set our key value pairs, let's use them here. So each dot value, and instead of using the size hard-coded here, we're going to go back, and what did we have it as size? So it's going to look for the variable there, and we don't forget to put it into quotes. So let's just do that for each of these, where there's a variable replacement. And obviously we've got to change these values. So use admin username, password, caching, storage account type, publisher. Again, remember I'm doing this because we can now independently change each VM type rather than have it hard-coded in code. We can just provide different variables at this runtime to fix that. So that should be enough for the moment. Let's head back over and let's try and address this SQL thing. 2019 Windows Server 2019. I think it should be that. It will complain in a minute if it's wrong, but from memory, I think it is that. Again, go to the documentation. It will give you different SKUs and offers and sizes for each of the VM types: Linux, Windows, SQL, SAP. There's hundreds of images in the marketplace. Okay, so I think we've got our objects created, and I think we've got our code updated to create the virtual machines. All looks good. So let's run a Terraform plan and see whether it shouts. Okay, we do have an error. Azure Virtual Machine Servers Interface Example ID. So we haven't updated the code properly from our example. So let's have a look yeah, so here I haven't addressed the interface ID piece, have we? So what did we do with the network interfaces? So we actually gave the key the same name as the server because it's running through the same variable list. So the key is going to be web. So this is going to be easy to fix. And we called it Nix. So our reference is Nix. So what we can do here is do Nix and then simply put in our each.key, which is the server name, which happens to be exactly the same name as the keys we used to create the Nix. So that should now identify correctly. Yep. So let's run the plan again. Okay, another error, but it looks like it's just a simple typo. I've put a space somewhere where there shouldn't be. So there. So I wish it would tell me all the errors in one hit, but never mind. Let's run the Terraform plan again. I've just noticed another error, so let's cancel that. There's one there in space in the caching as well. Let's quickly do a quick sanity check while that's cancelling. Make sure I've got everything without any spaces. Okay, right, let's try again. Plan. Okay, no errors that time. It's going to create 3 objects. So obviously our virtual servers. Let's just apply it and see what we get created. Let's run Terraform apply and then our plan file. Okay, we've got another error here. Actually creating the machine this time. It doesn't seem to like SKU not available message. Failed capacity restriction, standard D3V is currently not available in location West US. Okay, that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? I didn't actually check to see what was available in West US. So let me just pause you here. I'm just going to go off and find out what my subscription actually permits and we'll fix that. Okay, just done a little bit of research and the standard D3V2, so the size of the machine that we've requested, isn't available in West US where we've built all our infrastructure. So let's tear the whole thing down and change the location. So let's clear the screen. So let's just do a Terraform Destroy. This is the beauty of doing it with our code. You don't have to do it all manually, so we can just do this. Flatten the whole environment we've built so far, and then we can change the location to something that does support the machine size that we want. Okay, that's finished. It's completely destroyed. It's taken 18 resources. So let's go and have a look and out the portal and refresh this. No resource group anymore. So let's just go back and confirm it's gone. Yeah, so our resource group's gone. So all the stuff we've built so far has now just been destroyed. And now let's just rebuild it again, but in a different location. And the good thing is, because we use a variable, we just need to change it here, one place. So let's change it to North Europe. And that's all we need to change the location. So let's now do another Terraform plan. Okay, it's going to create 20 objects, so everything basically from scratch. Let's just run the apply and see if we get any errors. Okay. So that finished successfully. So we've got some resources. So let's head over to our portal and have a look. Let's do a refresh. Got our resource group. And we've got all our infrastructure we previously had, plus more. So we've also got our management, our servers now. So let's take a look at the first one. So man01, so our management box. It's on our management VNet, subnet. It's of pretty much what we wanted it to build. So we're all good there. Obviously, we can't connect to it right now because we don't have any public IP addresses. So we need to fix that. Let's have a look at the boot diagnostics. And obviously that's not configured because obviously normally you'd see a screenshot of what's going on the console at the time. So let's add boot diagnostics to our machines now. If you remember from one of the early videos, we created these storage accounts, and we created 2 storage accounts. One called Diag, which was going to be for our diagnostic information from our VM, so that's the one we need to use. And we created another one for our guest, which is where we're going to stick our customization scripts for our custom script extension guest builds later on. So let's configure our boot diagnostics to send its data for the VMs to this storage account. So let's head over to storage.io and just have a look at virtual machine again. So is there something in here that allows us to set the boot diagnostics? Yes, there is. So there's a block called boot diagnostics. So let's just grab that. And let's head back to our main.tf where the virtual machines are. So here, so let's add another configuration block, boot diagnostics. Now what do we need to put in here? I believe it should tell us. So storage, yeah, storage account URI, sorry. So what do we need to put in here? So we know it's our storage account. So SA, I'm pretty sure that's the alias we gave it. Let's just quickly check. So our storage accounts are the alias of SA, and we created one called Diag. So we're going to use that one. So storage, what was the last? I think we need to put the primary. Primary blob endpoint, I think. And obviously we need to put something in here. So it'd be Diag, which is the name alias that we give in the Diag storage. I'm not sure if that's right. I think that's right. Primary blob endpoint. Well, we can only find out, can't we? So let's do a plan. Okay, it didn't complain. So it's adding 3 diagnostic parameters to our VMs. So let's apply that. Okay, so that completed successfully, supposedly. So let's head over to the portal and see whether we got diagnostics information now. Okay, so it's configured, but we don't have any data. So we just need to give it a few minutes to collect that data. So let's go back and have a look at another VM, see whether that's got data yet. So let's have a look at our SQL server, boot diagnostics. Yeah, it's still waiting for some data. But what we can do is we can go and have a look at the storage account, the Diag storage account, which was this one. And we should now have some containers in here for our boot diagnostics for each of the servers. So we're good there. Let's go back to our slides for the minute. Let's just quickly switch over. So we've got our virtual servers built. We've got no way to access them yet. So we need to get a public IP address, one for the gateway, which we haven't built yet, and one for our management server so that we can actually get to the infrastructure. And then once we get onto this management box, we can then use it to access these other boxes. So we need to provision some public IPs now and attach them to this jump box. So let's do that next. So let's head back over to our client. Okay, so let's head over to Terraform IO and let's look for public IP. Azure RM public IP. Let's have a look. So let's grab that text and put it into our code. Obviously, we're not going to call it example, so we rename it to pips. So we need to give it a name for the public IP, a resource group name. So let's fix that. We know where that's going. It's going to go into RG main name. And we're going to go into RG main location. Happy with static for the allocation for public IPs. Let's get rid of tags for the moment. We don't necessarily need to tag these. Right, so we need 2, don't we? We need one for the management box and we need one for our application gateway, which we haven't created yet. So we're going to need to do this technique again where we're going to have a list of them. So let's head over to our variables. Let's create one for public IPs. So new variable, and let's call it pips. Again, we're going to use the type of map so that we can create our objects as we like. And let's create some defaults. And the first one we'll create this again. Let's stick to if you keep your name in uniform, it makes it really easy to use elsewhere in the code. So we know that we want one on our management server, which is called man01. So let's create an object for that. We also know we need one for later on. We're going to need a public IP for our gateway. So let's prepare that now. App gateway. Okay, so that's probably enough to create our public IPs. So let's head into here and let's go again, and the for each var pips, so var dot pips. So for each item in here, it's going to create a public IP, and we want to give it a name of the key, which is going to be each.key, and we'll give it -pip as our name. It's going to be in that resource group, that location. It's going to be allocation static. I think that should do. Let's do a Terraform plan. See what we get. Okay, something wrong here. Var pips default block default here. Did you mean default? Okay, I've done the set my variable up wrong. Again, it should be default equals. So let's run that. Okay, that completed successfully. So let's now apply that and see whether it creates our public IPs. Let's get the command right. Okay, that completed successfully. So we've got 2 additional resources added. So let's head over to our portal and take a look. So they should be in this resource group. Let's close that up. We should see some public IPs in here, and we don't yet. All right, let's come out and go back in again. There we go. We've got one for our application gateway, and we've got one for our management box. Now, if we take a look at them, they're not actually attached to anything right now. So it's got a public IP, great. But that's it. They're not really being used by anything. So we need to now attach it to our virtual machine. So let's head back over to the documentation. So where do we do that? So I think if we have a look at virtual server again, so the Windows virtual machine, I believe we actually can specify it when we create the IP configuration in this block here. So it's actually on the VNet that we want to do this on. So let's look for virtual network. Sorry, virtual network interface is what I'm looking for. Your own virtual network interface. So where do we set the public IP then? So we've got the IT configuration block here. Is there anything around public IPs? There we go, public IP address allocation. So we need to create public IP address ID. That's the one we want. So we need to link it into there. So if we just grab, okay, so let me copy and paste it. Let's do some typing instead. So we head back over to our main, find our network interface block, which is this one. And we want to add public IP address ID. Luckily, we got that really cool extension installed, so it tells me what it is. Now, what do we need to put in here? So obviously we created the public IPs, and they've each got an identity. When we did this here, so we can call pips with the name of the server name, which will be the key. So similar to what we've done elsewhere, let's attempt to do that. So it'd be Azure RM public IP pips .id, but obviously we want to grab the value of something in here. Luckily, because we've uniformly given it the same name as our server, so the key value, we can actually use the key again in this instance. So because it's interface var servers, we can just simply put each.key. Now there is a slight problem with this, in that it's going to iterate through this list of interfaces, and it's going to create one for each server. So 3 servers, but we've only got a public IP required for 1. So as it goes through, it's going to try and look for, it's going to find one for the management 01, fine, but it's not going to find one for SQL 01, and it's not going to find one for web 01. So we are going to get an error here, in theory. So let's just see whether it does give us an error. So Terraform plan. Yeah, as expected, it's erroring when it's trying to apply a public IP to web 01, and if it had got past that, and SQL 01, let's see. But it was successful when applying to the management 01. So we got to fix this. Let's just quickly format it better. Terraform format. Okay. So we need to only run this if we want it to have a public IP, and not on a server that we don't want to have a public IP on. So if we go back to our variables, we can do something else. So on our server list, let's add another parameter key value pair, and let's call it public IP. And let's give that a value of true. Again, let's format that properly. I don't like that. So we want the man 01 to have a public IP of true. This one we obviously we don't want one, so we'll put that as false. And obviously this SQL, we don't want a public IP either, so we'll put that as false. So now we've got this extra value that we can actually iterate through and look for. So if we go back to our main, we can now, let's just put that into our clipboard for the moment. We can now use an if statement. So in Terraform, there's some if-else commands similar to like most codes. So what we can actually do now is we can say if something, I don't know, is not equal to false, for example, then do this, or else do this. So what's this telling us? So what we can do is we can say, well, let's look at each value in our case. So if each dot value what do we call it? Is it public IP? Yeah, public IP. So if each dot value public IP is not false, then do this. So if it's not false, then we do the I've lost it from my clipboard now, so I'm going to have to type it. So Azure RM underscore public IP. Was it pip? I can't remember. What do we call it when we create the public IPs? Azure RM public IP pips. What did I have in there? Oh, that's right. It was each dot key, wasn't it? Each key dot ID. Or so let me just recap that, because a little bit of a mess up there. So if this value is not false, i.e. it's true, then the public IP should be this, which is our public IP pips with the name of our key, which is going to be this one, because we're passing in man 01. And if it's not, just give it a value of null. So the only, as it iterates through this interface list, the only public IP that's going to get associated is one where we've got the value equal to true, which is only this one up here. So these ones will just become null. So hopefully that's got around our error. So let's just check that again. So let's do a Terraform plan. Okay, no errors this time. So it's only identified one object to change, and it should be our public IP attached to this NIC. So let's run that, apply. Okay, it says it's completed. So let's head over to the portal and take a look. So we've got a public IP. Let's refresh that. And now it's here, it's associated with man 01 NIC. So we should now be able to get to our management server. So if we go and have a look at that, it should now have a public IP, which it does. So we should be able to RDP onto that now. Let's just open up a RDP client, get to the IP address. We can. I can't remember what we put as the credentials, so let's just quickly have a look at our variables that we put. So it was admin user, and that is the password. Obviously, I will be changing this before the video goes up, so don't try and use it. So it's admin user, and that was the password. And we are, we're connected. So we now got a session to our new management server. And obviously from this jump box now, we should be able to access those other servers. There we go. Let's log in for the first time. So I won't let that chug along, but we've got connectivity. Just make sure we actually do see some kind of screen. It takes a bit of time on the first run. There we go. It's starting to lighten up. There we go. We've got our management server. So obviously from here we could jump onto those SQL server and the web server. Let's quickly just go back to our portal and see if we've got diagnostics information yet. Hopefully we've got something to see there. There you go. And there's our diagnostics information working. So we're in quite a good place right now. So we've got, let's go quickly just go back to the slides. There we go. So we've now got our management box with a public IP. It has access to this infrastructure. So our web server and our SQL server. We've got our diagnostics information going to our storage account. What else do we need? We do need to build these disks, additional disks for the SQL server. So I think we'll do that next. Yeah, we'll build the disks next. And that'll probably be it for this video. It's getting a quite long video as it is. So yeah, we'll configure these disks. So let's head back over to our client. So the first thing to do, let's head over to terraform.io and see what's involved in creating a data disk. Data disk. What am I looking for? Maybe it's a managed disk. Yeah, Azure RM managed disk. Okay, so let's grab this block of text. So this is the creation for the disk, and let's head over to our code and place it. Let's get a bit more space. Right. So now we're going to create our disks. Call it disks. So we need a name, we need some other bits. So we know what these are going to be: RG main and RG main for the location. I spelled that wrong. Name, and this should be, oh, that should be location. Sorry guys, it's getting late. RG main name. Right, we've got that fixed. Obviously we may want to change the storage type, but you get the idea. We could easily put it into a variable, create it empty, and then we've got a size. Let's not worry about tags. So we need 2 extra disks. So let's head over to our variables and let's create one for disks. Disks. Again, you know what we're going to do. We're going to use the map because we all like the map. And let's give it some defaults. And so what we're going to do for the disk names. So obviously each disk name needs to be unique, really. Otherwise you're not going to be able to identify them very well in the Azure portal. And we know what server they need to go on. So SQL, let's give it a name of SQL01. I don't know. Disk 1. Makes sense, doesn't it? So that'll be our first disk. And the second one is going to be disk 2. So that's going to be our unique key and our name of the disk. What else did we have in here? So we also had these. So let's take those out because obviously we want each one to potentially be different. So in here, let's add some more items. So let's format that properly. Format. Okay, so I'm happy for them both to be standard LRS. Creating them as empty. Now, obviously, 1 gig's not big enough for our database. So let's say we want. So disk 1 is going to be our database. So let's make that 20 gig. And disk 2 is going to be our log. So we can make that a bit smaller. Let's make that 5 gig. Okay. Now, let's use the for each var disks. So you're getting familiar with this now. And obviously the name is going to be, we want the name of the disks to be our key. So it'd be simply each dot key. And obviously we want to change these to be whatever the value is we've put in our variable. So each dot value. And then obviously some kind of value. So let's just quickly put that everywhere. And obviously we want the value of that in this one. And we want the value of that in that one, and so on. Okay, so that should be enough to create our disks. So let's run Terraform plan. Okay, did get an error here. The value of the object has 3 attributes, so something here is wrong. Storage account. The given key does not identify an element. Now, again, sucker of the spaces. Watch out for that. So let's run that again. Okay, that's better. No errors this time. So now let's apply that and see whether it creates our disks. Okay, so it created them. Let's go over and have a look and see whether we can see them yet. So if we refresh our group, we should hopefully see some disks, manage disks. So we've got OS disks still, but not the custom ones yet. Let's do another refresh. There we go. It's created disk 1, and there should be a disk 2 for SQL somewhere. Let's refresh. Yeah, there we go. We've got both our data disks. Now they're not actually doing anything yet, so they're just disks. They're of the size that we requested. So in this case, 20 gig, not attached to anything. So we now need to attach them to the VM, our SQL VM. So let's head over and how do we attach a disk? Attach, just search for that. Is there anything useful? Let's get that case sorted out. There you go, Azure RM virtual machine data disk attachment. So let's have a look at that. So in the examples, there is a block here. So we needed to provide the disk ID and the virtual machine ID, and then a LUN number and what sort of caching we need. So let's grab that block. So in our attachment, so let's call this, I don't know, disk attach. Right, so we need a disk ID and a machine ID and a LUN. So again, we can add these to our existing variable. So let's do that. So we've already got a variable for each disk. Let's add those. Format. Oh. Make it pretty. So we can change those values when we iterate through. So now we can actually go through that same list again. So we can do for each of our disks. Now, obviously we know what the managed disk ID is going to be through this list because it's just created it up here, but we need to also tell it what VM it needs to go to. So if we go back to our variables, we need to add another parameter each one. So I don't know, attach to. Let's call it that. And then we can decide what we want to attach it to. So if we attach it to the same name as what our SQL server is, then we can specify that here, and we'll be able to reference it to our server key. So where's these disks on? There we go. Obviously we want them both to attach to the same server. So let's just prettify that a minute by Terraform format. Okay. So we've got this attached to value now. So in here, we can now, so we've got the managed disk ID. So we know what that is. It's disks.id, but we need to also, so remember we're referring this now, and we've got the ID disks. So we can put key.value in here. Each.key. So let me just explain that a bit better. So as we go through this list of disks in our variables, this one, it's going to look for the managed disk from this object with the ID of the key. So in this case, that. And it's going to get the ID of that, and that's defined the disk it's going to attach. Now we've got to define the machine we've got to attach it to. So now we can do var. So we can now we can do each.key. Sorry, no, each.value, and we can specify what we've put in our thing here. So we call it attached to. So it's going to specify SQL 01. That's still not right, 100%. Let me just correct that. So let's delete that. It's actually going to be Azure RM. We need the virtual machine name. So it's going to be virtual machine servers. Oh. Then our key.id. So what that's going to do is it's going to look for our virtual machine block servers and then look for the value SQL 01 and get the ID. So that's this one up here where we created the servers. So obviously it's created one with an ID of SQL 01. It's going to grab that out of this object, grab the ID of it, and that's what it's going to attach it to. And obviously we don't want to hard code that there because we've now put it in our variable. So we can do each.value. And we can specify LUN, which is what we called it, and each.value. Actually, just copy and paste it. Caching. So as it goes through this list of disks, it's going to know what values to set it, and also now what caching type and LUN number. Obviously, these need to be set different. So let's call that one. Can't have two disks on the same LUN number. That'd be silly. So let's call that one 11, and it's both going to be attached to this server. So that should be fine. That should now attach those disks we've created to our server. But before we do, let's just check that what the server's currently got. So what was the IP address of our SQL server? So we've got 424. Let's see if that works in my clipboard. So if we jump onto our management box, which is this one, and we should now be able to RDP to that one as well from here. Of course, it doesn't like the pasting of the IP. So 10424. 10242. I don't think I got that right, have I? 10424. 424. So we can get to that. It was admin user. And I cannot remember the password. So let's go back to our code again. And it was that. Hopefully it'll let me copy and paste. I don't really want to have to type that. Is it going to let me? Hopefully. Yep. So we're now going to connect to our SQL server. Via our management box. So that's not the true IP. It's actually this one here is what we're on. As you can see, it's got SQL installed because obviously that's the image we chose. So if we just quickly launch SQL, hopefully it won't take too long to load. There's the management studio there. So that while that's running, let's just check. It should only have one disk at the moment. One disk, see, and there's temporary one, which Azure always sticks in. It's basically, I'll do a deep dive into Azure virtual machines in another video, but just know that that's something that every VM you build in Azure has a temporary drive, and that's local to the host it's running on. There's loads of reasons for it. It's to make things faster, but it is disposable and it's not persistent. So don't put any important data on there. It's ideal for things like logs where you're happy to destroy them and lose them. But for the sake of this video, you don't need to know what they are. But just know we've only got one drive and this temporary drive. So SQL is running. Let's minimize that for the moment. Crack on with our disks. So just make sure we've got everything right. So we've got our disks created. Now we're going to attach them. We've done the code to do the attach. So let's do a Terraform plan and see whether it likes it. Okay, all good. So let's apply that. Okay, so that's finished. It's created the dependencies by the looks of it. So let's head over to the portal and have a look. So let's go back and have a look at one of our disks. It should now be attached. Yep, so it's managed by SQL01. So if we jump over to our SQL server, let's leave that connected. So we still got these disks. We haven't actually got any new ones. So we now need to configure the OS to use them. So if we were to go into manage, where is it going to be? Computer management. When that finishes loading. So we should now see new disks in here. There we go. So we've got our 2 new disks unallocated. Now, obviously, naturally, we can go through, create a new volume, specify all the details for it, give it a driver letter, etc., make it usable by the operating system. We can do that for both. Go through and do it to the other one. So we now got 2 additional drives. There we go. But we don't want to have to do it all manually, do we? We want to be able to use guest customization to do that. So when the machine builds, we want it to run some guest configuration that will configure those disks automatically. Okay, so in the next video, we are going to learn some guest customization using Terraform. It's going to involve creating some PowerShell scripts, uploading them to a storage account, creating some identity so that the VMs can actually retrieve those scripts and run them on post build. So I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least found it useful. If you did, please hit that like button. And if you want to make sure you don't miss out on the future videos that are coming up, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me if you do. So until then, take care.